If you stay here, you are going to have a home birth. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Elizabeth. I make mom and cooking videos, so if you enjoy that kind of content, make sure you subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for your support. I'm mom to a toddler, Dominic, and currently pregnant with our second baby, a little girl. Today I wanted to share the birth story of my toddler, Dominic. Just as a little bit of a warning, it does get pretty crazy and pretty intense, but I don't feel like it was traumatic or there was ever a point where things were done to me that I wasn't okay with or anything like that. This will probably end up being pretty long, so I'll split it into two parts. Just as a bit of setup, the care that I had been seeing with Dominic, and I'm actually doing the same thing again with this pregnancy, I had been going to a group that was a mix of midwives and OBs. I saw a couple OBs, but I mostly stuck with midwives. Then toward the end, there was one that I liked that I was mostly seeing. Our plan was to go to the hospital in the next town over that's about 20 minutes away. If the labor continues to stay low risk and safe, you can have a midwife deliver. But if something happens where they deem it riskier, then they'll call in an OB, and it's just whoever's on call. There are, I think, a few dozen different OBs and midwives that they have available, so I really had no idea who was going to deliver my baby, and I was okay with that because I actually hired a doula and got to know her beforehand. I had been texting and seeing her throughout my pregnancy. The plan was for her to come to my house and help me labor at home, and then to come to the hospital with us as well for support there. Since I had and have a relationship with my doula, I wasn't worried about who was going to deliver my baby, since I knew that she and of course my husband would be there for support for the whole thing. I did a lot of research and watched and listened to a lot of different people's stories, and I decided that the best option for me would be to try to have an unmedicated birth. There are lots of different reasons to decide to go for an unmedicated birth. Some people are just opposed to any kind of augmentation, or they don't want to risk their baby having any effects of an epidural. Sometimes also, if you have one intervention, you're more likely to have more intervention and possibly end up with a C-section, which does have higher risks than a vaginal birth. Some people have back issues or are worried about long-lasting effects of an epidural on their back. Also, if you have an epidural, you're stuck in the bed, so that can make it take longer for the baby to get down into the right position. You also oftentimes can't walk around for hours afterwards because of the numbing. For me personally, I would say there were a couple of reasons. Part of it was because I didn't want to be limited to the bed. I wanted to have lots of options. I wanted to have the option to labor the tub. I wanted to have the option to walk around and help work my baby down that way. But honestly, the biggest reason was I have a very high pain tolerance, and I just wanted to see if I could do it. That probably sounds silly to some people, but I know my body, and I just thought it would be a cool thing to be able to say I birthed a baby without any medication. I just think that's a cool concept. I wanted to put in here, no matter what way your baby is born, if you have a C-section, if you have a home birth, if you give birth at a hospital or a birth center, midwives, OBs, in the woods by yourself, whatever you want to do. It's all amazing and beautiful. I'm so proud of everyone who's given birth, no matter what way they did it. I just think it's such a powerful and amazing thing. Okay, now I'll start a little bit before my due date. The first signs of labor, it was around 38, 39 weeks. I had been having Braxton Hicks contractions, and then in those weeks I had a lot of Braxton Hicks contractions. I think I was about 38 and a half or 39 weeks pregnant. My husband and I went to see a movie. I know, back when you could go to a movie theater and see a movie, and the only thing you were worried about is if this might be the last time you could see a movie in a movie theater before being a family of three. But anyway, we went and saw a movie. And during the movie, I started to have what was a little bit more than Braxton Hicks, I would say kind of like crampy feelings. I had probably around 6 or 7 of these. They lasted maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds during the movie, but I wouldn't really call them painful. So I thought, maybe I'm going into labor, but as soon as the movie was over and I stood up and walked around, they went away. So I figured that was probably just from sitting still. You're more likely to have like Braxton Hicks or cramps if you're sitting still, and especially if you're not drinking enough liquids. But since they went away, I knew it wasn't real labor. At my 37-week appointment, my midwife offered to check me for dilation. I declined. When I was that early, I knew it wouldn't really make much of a difference either way. So I declined. At my 39-week prenatal appointment, since I had been having some of the cramping and lots of Braxton Hicks, I decided to get checked. And at that appointment, I was already 2 centimeters dilated, and I think I was 60% effaced. Definitely something was going on, but I wasn't in labor. I went through the 39 weeks, lots of Braxton Hicks, not any real contractions. Then my 40-week day came, and I absolutely was not expecting to have a baby on my exact 40 weeks. So I baked myself consolation cookies, chocolate chip cookies that were delicious, but I ended up making way too big of a batch. So we had lots of cookies. I don't think I could even finish them. But anyway, I had a prenatal appointment at 40 weeks and 1 day. So the next day, I had my midwife check me and I was 3 centimeters dilated and 80% effaced. A lot of people at that point are having contractions and in early labor. My midwife said she thought I was a perfect candidate to have my membranes stripped. So I went ahead and did that. For me, it did not hurt to get my membranes stripped. Some people experience pain with that. It didn't hurt, it was just a bit uncomfortable. There have been studies done on it that do show if your body is ready and you have your membrane stripped, it's more likely to kind of jumpstart your labor. You can have some cramping and bleeding throughout the day, which I had a little bit, nothing major. That night, since we knew we were probably going to have a baby pretty soon, my husband and I went out for our last little date night. Actually, one of our favorite ever restaurants was closing down, so they were only going to be open for a couple more weeks. But we went there, got a nice dinner. My husband didn't even get a drink in case we had to go to the hospital. I think I got my favorite pregnancy drink, which was called the Virgin Painkiller. It's kind of silly, but I thought it was funny. They made it with all these tropical fruits, and it was actually quite delicious. Okay, so we had our date night, and then we went to bed around 11 o'clock. No signs of labor, no contractions, but I woke up at 4 a.m. to a contraction. It basically just felt like a period cramp at that point. Sorry, I know this is TMI, but it's probably something that you should be aware of if you're a pregnant person. I had to go to the bathroom like 3 times in a row, and that can be a sign of labor if your body's just like kind of clearing itself out and kind of getting ready. I started timing the contractions. They were 4 minutes apart, lasting about 45-50 seconds. One of the things you hear is if you're in early labor, you should try to sleep through it if you can, get as much rest, since you won't be getting much rest if it is true labor in the next couple of days. So I laid in my bed and I tried to sleep, but as soon as I had another contraction, it wasn't comfortable at all being in the bed. So I'm like, there's no way I can sleep through this. I most likely had slept through some of early labor and some of the lighter contractions. So I decided to take a nice relaxing shower, get myself ready for going to the hospital. My phone's waterproof, so I took it into the shower with me. Probably took like a 45-minute, nice, warm, relaxing shower, timed the contractions while I was in there. They were still staying about the same, about 4 minutes apart. My hospital uses the 5-1-1 protocol, which means you should go to the hospital when your contractions are 5 minutes apart, they last 1 minute long, and this has been going on for an hour. I'm like, this is my first pregnancy. I'm sure this will go on for hours and hours, so I'm just gonna stay home as much as I possibly can. For about an hour and a half, the contractions felt like period cramps. Then about 5:45, I threw up, and they started to get a little worse. My husband woke up at that point and he said, oh, should I go to work? And I'm like, nope, we're probably gonna have a baby today, so definitely need you to stay here with me. It was a Friday. So I said, okay, no work. Then about 6 o'clock, everything was getting a little more intense, so I went ahead and gave my doula a call. I don't know why I called her. I should have texted her. Poor thing. She sounded like she was in deep sleep, so I feel bad that I woke her out of that, but I definitely knew I was going to need her soon. I think she stayed on the phone with me through a contraction too, and she said she would go ahead and take care of a couple things at her house and then head over in a couple hours. I kept throwing up. I actually threw up 6 times total in labor. Granted, after the first couple times, it was pretty much just water. They actually say that throwing up in labor is good for having a fast labor because it actually helps your body dilate. But the negative is I ended up getting dehydrated because I wasn't able to hold water down. We'll get to that a little bit more later in the story. The timing was staying about the same. They were getting a little bit longer, more to that minute part, staying about 3 to 4 minutes apart, but they were getting very much more intense. Different people cope with them different ways, want to do different things. What I wanted to do most of the time was actually just walk, and it felt good to walk through them. The more intense they got though, I didn't want to walk as much. I would try standing on my tiptoes, and or I would hold on to one of our dining room chairs and stand up and down. About 8:15 is when my doula came over, and I was so relieved to see her. She helped me breathe through it, rubbed my back some, just was there physically and emotionally to support me. That was super helpful. I think it was around 8:30 or 9. My husband asked if I wanted McDonald's for breakfast. I'm like, no, I've been throwing up. I can't even think about McDonald's. And I will say I am very pro eating and drinking in labor. A lot of hospitals tell you you can't eat while you're in labor. The reason for that is because if there would be an emergency and you have to go under general anesthesia, there's a risk of you vomiting and asphyxiating on the vomit. But those cases are extremely rare. For some people, it can be very helpful to eat and drink in labor to keep your energy up. But for me, I was trying to drink as much water as I could. I just couldn't keep it down. but I didn't even want to think about eating food. I have an exercise ball, so I would sit on the ball in between my contractions. That felt more comfortable than sitting on the couch or anything. And at that point, I had been up since 4 o'clock, so I needed to at least have some time sitting rather than standing the entire time. Then about 9:30 in the morning, the contractions got really intense, like definitely some of the most intense things I've ever felt in my life. And I believe that's when I was going through transition, which at that point you probably should have been at the hospital for several hours, but I was at home. And my doula looked at me and she said, "Elizabeth, you have 2 options. If you stay here, you are going to have a home birth." My doula actually practices as a midwife performing home births as well, so she would have been okay doing that. Then she said, "Or we can go to the hospital now. If you want to wait any longer to go to the hospital, it's going to be an extremely painful car ride. So if you want to get to the hospital, I recommend doing it now." So I said, "Okay, let's go to the hospital." We had everything packed in our bags, ready to go, so we just put that stuff in the car. My water had not broken yet at this point, so I put a few towels in the car, and my doula recommended sitting in the back seat so I could have a little bit more room to have contractions in the car. That was a good idea. I do recommend that. I was so glad at this point that we have an SUV. In general, now that I have an SUV, I don't think I'll ever go back to a sedan. I just like being able to sit up a little bit higher, especially 3rd trimester. It is so hard getting in and out of a car when you have to kind of go down, but getting up into my SUV was really nice. Just in the few minutes getting ready to go out the door, I had several contractions. We were ready to get in the car. I waited till I had 1 more contraction, and then I hopped in the car and said, "Okay, let's go." I told my husband, "Don't rush. I'm sure we still have plenty of time." He made what's normally a 20-minute ride about a 15-minute ride. But anyway, I was just in labor land. You're supposed to call your doctor's office and let them know that you're heading up, and actually tried calling, and I got a voicemail, so I'm just like, well, we're going anyway, so I'm just gonna show up. It'll be fine. So I probably had about 5 contractions in the car, and you know, that handle on the side, I ended up holding onto that and like kind of standing up in my seat, trying to do something to help get through contractions. They were definitely very painful. I actually thought it would be a little bit worse. They weren't quite as bad as I thought it would be in the car, but it was definitely a pretty rough car ride. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe.